The crystal champagne flute froze inches from billionaire Marcus Reed's lips as a desperate voice cut through Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. "Don't drink that! It's poison!" The homeless teenager burst through the mahogany doors of Le Bernardin like a man possessed, his rain-soaked sneakers sliding across marble floors worth more than most people's homes. Security guards lunged forward as the priceless glass shattered against Italian marble Dome Perignon, spreading like blood across white stone. But in that split second, as chaos erupted and phones started recording, Reed caught something in the boy's dark eyes that stopped him cold. Not madness, certainty. The kind of scientific precision that had built Reed's pharmaceutical empire from nothing. How did a street kid know what trained bodyguards had missed? The answer would rewrite both their destinies forever. 3 months earlier, Derek Matthews had been living a completely different existence, but sometimes fate strips everything away until only your truest self remains. The Interstate 95 overpass stretched above him like a concrete cathedral, 18-wheelers thundering overhead while Derek worked by battery-powered LED strips in his makeshift laboratory. Most people saw a homeless encampment. Derek saw possibility, glass beakers salvaged from Columbia University's dumpsters. Bunsen burners powered by camping fuel canisters traded for tutoring sessions with grad students who never asked his real story. pH strips acquired through connections with students who understood that brilliance didn't require a mailing address. His laboratory wasn't impressive by conventional standards. Plastic tarps kept the rain out, solar panels charged his equipment, and everything had to fit in 2 shopping carts when the police swept through. But every piece had been chosen with surgical precision, arranged with the methodology of someone who understood that knowledge was the ultimate currency. "Nitrogen levels are dangerously high," Derek muttered, testing water samples brought by fellow homeless individuals from various city sources. Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who'd lost her apartment to medical bankruptcy, watched anxiously as he worked with equipment that would make chemistry professors jealous. "This one's safe to drink, but avoid the fountain near Broadway. Bacterial contamination could kill you." She pressed a crumpled $5 bill into his palm. "You saved my grandson from getting sick last week." Derek shook his head, trying to hand it back. "Keep it. Science should serve everyone." But Mrs. Rodriguez was already walking away, and Derek's stomach betrayed him with a vicious growl. When had he last eaten? 2 days ago, 3-time blurred when hunger became your constant companion. He pulled out his most treasured possession, a photograph tucked inside a waterproof notebook. 3 people in pristine lab coats, arms around each other, beaming at the camera. His father, Dr. Robert Matthews. His mother, Dr. Jennifer Matthews. And between them, a younger Derek wearing a junior researcher badge from MIT's summer program. Dad always said knowledge was the one thing nobody could steal. He whispered to the photograph like others might pray. The memory hit like it always did. Sudden, sharp, unforgiving. The phone call at 2 a.m., laboratory explosion, gas leak. His father, the brilliant chemist who'd taught him to see molecules like music, reduced to newspaper headlines about industrial accidents and safety violations. Everything unraveled after that. Legal battles over insurance claims that mysteriously got denied. Medical bills that devoured their savings as his mother battled severe depression. The Manhattan penthouse sold. The cars repossessed. His college fund emptied to keep his mother in treatment at the private facility upstate. Derek's hands shook, not from November's bitter cold, but from the familiar rage that lived in his chest like a caged animal. 4 years. 4 years since he'd been Derek Matthews' honor student with a full scholarship to MIT. Now he was just another invisible face on the street counting quarters for his next meal. But giving up wasn't in his DNA. Every morning, Derek woke before dawn to collect discarded equipment from Columbia's chemistry department. Broken beakers could be repaired. Expired reagents still had useful properties. and the graduate students who saw him digging through dumpsters. Most looked away, but a few, the ones who recognized intelligence regardless of circumstances, would slip him textbooks and journals. "Your methodology is extraordinary," Professor Williams had said last month, examining Derek's handwritten analysis of local water contamination. "Have you considered formal education?" If only she knew. Derek had smiled politely, taking the compliment without revealing that he'd been accepted to MIT's chemistry program before life imploded. The acceptance letter was still in his notebook next to his family photo. A reminder of dreams deferred, not abandoned. Winter was approaching fast. Already morning frost turned his breath to clouds, and the concrete beneath his sleeping bag felt like ice. Other homeless individuals talked about heading south, but Derek couldn't leave, not when his mother was only 2 hours away, depending on him to visit when he could scrape together bus fare, not when he was so close to a breakthrough, because Derek had a theory, a dangerous, impossible theory about why his father really died. It started with inconsistencies in the accident report, gas concentrations that didn't match equipment specifications, safety protocols that his father, obsessed with precision, would never have ignored. And then there were the research notes, pages of his father's work on revolutionary cancer treatments that had mysteriously vanished from the lab after the explosion. Someone had murdered his father. Derek was certain, and someday, when he had the resources and credibility to investigate properly, he'd prove it. Until then, he survived. One day, one chemical analysis, one act of service at a time. Because Dr. Robert Matthews hadn't raised a quitter. He'd raised a scientist, and scientists never stopped asking questions. The scholarship application deadline was next week. Derek had been working on it by streetlight, crafting essays that explained his situation without begging for pity. His grades were 4 years old, but his knowledge had only grown. Self-taught advanced chemistry, real-world application, letters of recommendation from graduate students who'd witnessed his work firsthand. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe someone would see past his circumstances to the mind underneath. Maybe. But first he had to survive the winter. And that meant finding better shelter, steady food, and enough stability to complete his application. What Derek didn't know was that destiny was already moving. That Thursday evening everything would change in ways he couldn't imagine. The thunderstorm hit lower Manhattan like a sledgehammer, turning November air into sheets of ice-cold rain. Derek huddled under the narrow awning of a closed bookstore, watching water cascade down the restaurant district's gleaming windows. Inside, Le Bernardin warm light spilled across white tablecloths and crystal stemware. He shouldn't be here. This neighborhood was for people who belonged, people with platinum cards and reservations and lives that made sense. But the storm had caught him during his evening rounds, and every doorway for 8 blocks was either locked or guarded. Through rain-streaked glass, Derek watched a man dining alone at a corner table. Distinguished, silver-haired. The kind of person who commanded attention without trying. Even from outside, Derek could see tension in the man's shoulders, the way his jaw tightened during what appeared to be a heated phone conversation. Marcus Reed, though Derek didn't know the name yet, pressed his phone closer to his ear, his free hand gripping the table's edge until his knuckles went white. "You can try your hostile takeover," Reed's voice carried faintly through the glass. "But I'll burn the company down before I let you profit from Robert's research." Robert. Something about that name sent a chill down Derek's spine that had nothing to do with the cold rain. The conversation ended abruptly. Reed slammed the phone down, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. The weight of whatever battle he was fighting seemed to settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. That's when the waiter approached. Derek had been people-watching long enough to read body language like a textbook. The waiter moved wrong, too careful, too deliberate. His hands trembled slightly as he carried a bottle of champagne that clearly hadn't come from the restaurant's cellar. No dust, no proper temperature conditioning. and the label was positioned to hide the vintage year. Everything about the moment screamed danger. The waiter's eyes darted toward the kitchen, then the exit as he approached Reed's table. Classic nervous behavior. Derek had seen it in chemistry labs when students tried to hide mistakes from professors. Fear mixed with guilt, creating a cocktail of tells that trained observers couldn't miss. And then the wind shifted, carrying through the restaurant's ventilation system came a scent that made Derek's scientific training scream warnings. Bitter almonds. Faint but unmistakable to someone who'd spent years studying organic chemistry. Potassium cyanide. His father had taught him about it during one of their weekend lab sessions. Smell is your first line of defense, son. Your nose can detect concentrations that instruments might miss. But if you ever smell bitter almonds where they shouldn't be, the waiter was now beside Reed's table, presenting the bottle with theatrical flourish. Reed nodded absently, still absorbed in his phone troubles as champagne poured into crystal that caught the restaurant's amber light like liquid fire. Derek's heart hammered against his ribs. From this distance, he couldn't be certain. Maybe it was a cleaning chemical from the kitchen. Maybe his paranoid mind was creating patterns where none existed. But Reed was lifting the glass. Time crystallized. Every chemistry lesson his father had ever taught him crashed together in a moment of absolute clarity. The concentration of bitter almond scent, the waiter's nervous behavior, the champagne's slightly off color that spoke of foreign additives. Someone was trying to kill that man. Derek's internal war lasted maybe 3 seconds. Getting involved meant exposure, meant police questions he couldn't answer without revealing his identity, meant losing the careful anonymity that kept him safe on the streets. But his father's voice echoed across 4 years of grief. With knowledge comes responsibility, son. If you can help someone, you help them, period. The glass was inches from Reed's lips. Thunder crashed overhead as Derek made his choice. He sprinted toward the restaurant's entrance lane, turning the sidewalk into a skating rink under his worn sneakers. The maitre d' looked up in alarm as this soaked homeless teenager burst toward the door. "Sir, I'm sorry, but—" Derek didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Reed was already tilting the glass champagne approaching his mouth while the waiter stepped back with the satisfaction of a job completed. "Don't drink that." Derek's voice cut through the dining room's refined murmur like a fire alarm. "It's poison." Every head turned. Conversations died. The crystal glass froze halfway to Reed's lips, champagne trembling with sudden stillness. For one heartbeat, the entire restaurant held its breath. Then chaos erupted and nothing would ever be the same. Security guards materialized from nowhere, moving toward Derek like guided missiles. The maitre d' was already on his radio, code red in the main dining room, homeless individual, possible mental health crisis. But Reed, something in the teenager's voice made him pause. The glass remained frozen in his grip as his eyes locked onto Derek's face. In that split second of connection, Reed saw what the security cameras couldn't capture: absolute certainty. Scientific precision. The look of someone who knew exactly what they were talking about. "Wait!" Reed's command cut through the confusion. "Let him speak!" The lead security guard hesitated, caught between protocol and his boss's direct order. "Sir, this individual—" "I said wait." Reed's voice carried decades of corporate authority, but his eyes never left Derek's face. Something about the teenager's scientific certainty, the way he'd identified a poison most people had never heard of, triggered memories Reed had tried to bury. Derek's chest heaved as he fought to catch his breath. Rain dripped from his hair onto the restaurant's pristine marble floor. Every eye in the room was on him. Wealthy diners, concerned staff, smartphones already recording what would become viral footage within hours. The champagne. Derek gasped, pointing at the glass in Reed's hand. "Don't drink it, please." "Son, what are you talking about?" Reed's voice remained calm, but his grip on the glass had tightened unconsciously. Derek pulled his weathered notebook from inside his jacket, pages damp, but protected by plastic sheeting. His hands shook as he flipped to a section filled with molecular diagrams and chemical formulas written in his father's precise handwriting. Potassium cyanide. He said the scientific words cutting through his exhaustion like a blade. I can smell it from outside. Bitter almonds. It's faint, but it's there. The waiter took a step backward. This is ridiculous. The champagne came from our finest cellar. No, it didn't. Derek's voice gained strength as his training took over. Real vintage champagne would have sediment temperature variance. This bottle is room temperature, no cellar dust, and the label's positioned to hide the year marking. He pointed at the waiter whose face had gone pale. And you're sweating despite the air conditioning. Classic stress response. Reed studied the champagne glass, then looked at the waiter. 25 years of running a pharmaceutical company had taught him to read people, and something in the waiter's expression triggered every alarm bell he had. I call the police, Reed said quietly. Sir, really, this is unnecessary. The waiter was backing toward the kitchen now. And test this champagne. Reed carefully set the glass on the table. Full chemical analysis. The waiter bolted. He made it exactly 12 feet before restaurant security tackled him to the ground. The kitchen erupted in shouts as other staff members scattered, but the damage was done. The confession was written all over the waiter's face. Derek collapsed into a nearby chair, adrenaline finally catching up with him. His notebook fell open, revealing pages of chemical equations, molecular structures, and analysis techniques that would have impressed university professors. Reed approached slowly, like someone trying not to spook a wounded animal. What's your name, son? Derek Matthews. How do you know about chemistry, Derek? The question hit deeper than Reed intended. Derek's eyes went distant, seeing not the restaurant's opulent decor, but a memory of a different lab, a different time. My father taught me, he said simply. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Within minutes, the restaurant was crawling with officers, paramedics, and crime scene technicians. The champagne glass was carefully bagged for analysis. The waiter, whose real name turned out to be Carlos Vega, a man with significant gambling debts, was read his rights while confessing to being paid $75,000 to ensure Marcus Reed never left the restaurant alive. Who paid you? Detective Morgan asked during preliminary questioning. Vega's answer would send shockwaves through the pharmaceutical industry. Richard Blackwood said Reed was about to ruin some business deal, said it had to look natural. Reed's face went white. Blackwood, his former business partner turned bitter rival. The same man who'd been trying to acquire Reed Pharmaceuticals through increasingly aggressive tactics. But that revelation was for later. In the immediate aftermath, as statements were taken and evidence catalogued, Reed found himself watching Derek with growing fascination. The kid wasn't just smart, he was brilliant. His explanation of the chemical analysis demonstrated graduate-level understanding. His observational skills rivaled trained investigators, and there was something about his methodology, his approach to problem-solving, that felt hauntingly familiar. Lab results just came back, Detective Morgan announced. Potassium cyanide, exactly as the young man identified. Concentration would have been fatal within minutes. A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Smartphones captured every moment as the story began spreading across social media. Homeless teen saves billionaire's life. But Derek seemed oblivious to the attention. He sat quietly in his corner, clutching his notebook, looking more exhausted than triumphant. When a reporter tried to interview him, he simply shook his head and turned away. Reed noticed this wasn't someone seeking fame or reward. This was someone who'd risked everything, his safety, his anonymity, his freedom, simply because it was the right thing to do. Derek, when Reed called softly. The teenager looked up with eyes that held far too much pain for someone so young. Thank you. You saved my life. I'm just glad you're safe, sir. The simplicity of the response, the genuine relief in Derek's voice, told Reed everything he needed to know about this remarkable young man's character. What Reed didn't yet realize was that this chance encounter would unlock secrets that had been buried for 4 years. that the notebook in Derek's hands contained more than just chemistry lessons, that the familiar methodology he'd recognized was more than coincidence, and that the man who'd tried to kill him tonight was the same man who'd destroyed the life of the most brilliant chemist Reed had ever known. But those revelations lay ahead. For now, there was just a billionaire and a homeless teenager connected by an act of courage that would change both their lives forever. As Sterling reached for his wallet, Derek's response would reveal something extraordinary. A Derek von Reed said, approaching the teenager who still sat quietly in the corner looking utterly drained. "I can't begin to express my gratitude. Please let me—" "No, sir." Derek held up his hand, not even looking at the money. "Just glad you're safe." Reed paused, wallet still open. In 40 years of business, no one had ever refused his money, especially not someone who clearly needed it desperately. "Son, you saved my life. That has to be worth something." Derek finally looked up, and Reed was struck again by the intelligence in those dark eyes. But there was something else there, too. A kind of integrity that seemed almost old-fashioned in the modern world. "It's not about worth," Derek said quietly. "You needed help. I had knowledge that could help. That's not a transaction, sir. That's just being human." The simplicity of the statement hit Reed like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had done something for him without expecting payment, without calculating angles or potential benefits? But Reed was also an observant man. A successful businessman learned to notice details, and the details about Derek Matthews were adding up to something remarkable. The notebook, for instance. Reed had glimpsed enough of its contents to recognize graduate-level chemistry equations. The handwriting was precise, methodical, the kind that came from rigorous scientific training. And those molecular diagrams weren't copied from textbooks. They showed original analysis and modification. Then there was Derek's observational technique. The way he'd identified the waiter's stress signals, his systematic approach to chemical analysis, even his explanation to police had followed scientific methodology, hypothesis, observation, conclusion. Reed unconsciously adjusted his MIT class ring, a nervous habit from his college days. Something about Derek's problem-solving approach felt eerily familiar, like an echo of conversations from long ago. "At least let me buy you dinner," Reed insisted. "And maybe see a doctor, make sure you're not hurt from all this excitement." Derek's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, betraying how long it had been since his last meal. A flush of embarrassment colored his cheeks. "I suppose if you're sure it's not too much trouble. After what you've done, it's the least I can offer." As they waited for paramedics to complete a basic medical check, Reed found himself drawn into conversation with this extraordinary young man. What started as polite small talk quickly revealed depths of knowledge that shouldn't exist in someone Derek's age, especially someone living on the streets. "Oh, where did you study chemistry?" Reed asked. "My father taught me. He was a researcher." Derek's voice caught slightly on the past tense. "What kind of research?" "Pharmaceutical compounds, cancer treatment protocols. He believed medicine should help people, not just make money." Something cold moved through Reed's chest. The phrasing, the idealism, even the specific focus on cancer research. It all felt like déjà vu. "Ooh, what was your father's name?" But before Derek could answer, his wallet fell from his jacket pocket as the paramedic adjusted his position. Reed instinctively bent to retrieve it, and that's when he saw it. A business card that had slipped out and was now lying face up on the marble floor. Reed Pharmaceuticals, CEO and Chief Research Officer Marcus Reed. Derek reached for it quickly, but not before Reed had seen his own name and company logo in the teenager's possession. "Where did you get that?" Reed asked, his voice carefully neutral. "It fell out of your pocket earlier," Derek said, handing it back. "I was going to return it, but—" He trailed off, looking suddenly exhausted again. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind the reality of cold hunger and homelessness that no amount of heroism could erase. Reed pocketed the card, but his mind was racing. A homeless teenager with advanced chemistry knowledge. A father who'd been a pharmaceutical researcher. problem-solving techniques that felt like something from his own past. The pieces weren't quite fitting together yet, but Reed had a feeling that when they did, everything would change. The conversation stuck with Reed all day, even during budget reviews and vendor calls. Marcus Reed's mind kept circling back to that morning, to Derek Matthews. His calm voice and the quiet way he'd listed chemical compounds like they were nothing. That kind of fluency didn't just happen, it took years of disciplined curiosity and heart. Around 4 p.m., Reed left the executive floor and rode the elevator down to the building's service level. He wanted to see something for himself. His head of security had tracked Derek to a nearby homeless shelter, but Reed needed to understand more about this remarkable young man. The Pine Street shelter was a world away from Manhattan's gleaming towers. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air was warm, thick with the scent of industrial soap and too many people in too small a space. Reed found Derek in the common area hunched over a battered laptop typing with fierce concentration. "Mind if I interrupt?" Reed asked, approaching slowly. Derek looked up startled. "Mr. Reed, you came here?" Reed smiled. "Couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. Listen, I have a proposal." Derek's expression grew wary. "What kind of proposal?" "There's a position opening at Reed Pharmaceuticals, research assistant, entry level but with advancement opportunities. Full benefits, housing stipend, and—" Reed paused, watching Derek's face carefully. "Access to our research library." For a moment, Derek said nothing. His hands trembled slightly as he processed the offer. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Because you have something money can't buy. Instinct, intelligence, and integrity." Reed sat down across from him. "I've spent decades around brilliant scientists, Derek. I recognize real talent when I see it." Derek's eyes filled with tears. He quickly blinked away. I don't have a college degree, no formal credentials. You saved my life with knowledge most people don't possess. That's credential enough. When would I start?" "Monday, if you want." Derek closed his eyes and Reed could practically see him weighing the decision. Safety versus uncertainty. The known struggle versus unknown opportunity. When Derek opened his eyes, there was steel in them. "I accept." Reed smiled. "Welcome to Reed Pharmaceuticals, Mr. Matthews." What neither of them expected was how everyone else would react. By Wednesday, the news had traveled faster than the company's internal messaging system. Derek Matthews, the homeless teenager who'd saved the CEO's life, had been hired directly into the research department. Nobody knew the full story, just whispers. That he was some kind of chemistry genius. That Reed himself had recruited him. That he might have some secret background, maybe government work, maybe even corporate espionage. The gossip bounced from lab to conference room. Some people were curious, others smiled and said, "Good for him." But not everyone was celebrating. In the break room, 2 research technicians leaned close over their salads. "I'm just saying," one whispered. "I have a master's in biochemistry and I've been waiting 3 years for a promotion." "This guy was literally homeless last week." Her colleague shrugged. "Maybe he knows something we don't." "Oh, please, it's Reed trying to look progressive. Check a box." That same energy trickled into boardrooms and Slack messages. Quiet resentment mixed with confusion. People weren't used to upward moves coming from outside the usual academic pipeline. Derek felt it the second he stepped into his new office on the 8th floor. It was modest. Just a desk, a computer, and access to the research database he'd dreamed about for years. But to him, it looked like another planet. When HR finished onboarding him, Derek asked if he could keep a photo of his family on his desk. Not for sentimentality, but to remind himself why he was here. That afternoon, he met with Dr. Patricia Webb, head of oncology research. She walked in with a clipboard and skeptical eyes. "So you're the new research assistant," she said, not offering to shake hands. Derek looked up from the computer terminal where he'd been reviewing cancer treatment protocols. "That's what I'm told. You have experience in pharmaceutical research." Derek smiled, only from the outside looking in. She didn't laugh. I've got data from our latest clinical trials compound analysis that needs verification and an entire review process that requires graduate-level understanding. Think you can manage that? Derek stood up. I'll need a few hours to review the methodology, but yes. Dr. Webb dropped a thick folder on his desk and walked out without another word. Later that evening, Reed stopped by Derek's office. The young man was still there at 9 p.m., surrounded by printouts and lab reports, making notes in his father's old notebook. "How's day one?" Reed asked. Derek exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "I've had worse," Reed smiled. "Dr. Webb give you a hard time?" "She doesn't scare me." Derek paused, then added, "But can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why now, why me? You could have just given me money and kept walking." Reed leaned against the doorframe. "Because I saw myself in you." Derek raised an eyebrow. "You were homeless." "No, but I was overlooked a lot. I came from nothing. My dad fixed cars in a small town in Ohio. I worked 3 jobs through college. People thought I didn't belong in rooms like this." Derek nodded slowly. "Now you're the one deciding who gets in." Reed nodded back. "Exactly." There was a beat of silence before Derek looked down at the research files on his desk. "I'll be honest. I'm nervous." "Good, means you care." Derek looked up again. "There's going to be people who hate this decision. They'll get over it or they won't. Either way, we're moving forward." Reed turned to leave but paused at the door. "You have a story, Derek, a real one, and now you've got a platform." As the door clicked behind him, Derek looked around his office. He remembered the years he'd spent in shelters, the nights he came home exhausted with barely enough energy to heat up soup. The opportunities he'd watched go to people who'd never even acknowledged his existence. He opened his desk drawer and placed his father's old lab notebook inside. Not to forget, but to remember exactly what it took to get here. But this story was about to take a turn that neither Derek nor Reed saw coming. And the spotlight was about to grow much more dangerous. By Friday morning, Derek's nameplate was mounted outside his office, Derek Matthews, Research Assistant, Oncology Division. It looked official, clean, permanent. Word had gotten out formally this time. The company-wide email hit inboxes Friday morning, sent by Reed himself. It was short, clear, and carried weight. He explained Derek's background, his qualifications, and more importantly, his value. He didn't frame it as charity or a feel-good gesture. He made it clear Derek was the best person for the job. Period. But that didn't stop the noise. Some managers grumbled under their breath. Others softened up once they saw Derek in action. He navigated complex research protocols better than most graduate students. He corrected errors in data analysis that had been overlooked for months. And he never showed off. He just worked quietly, methodically, better than anyone had expected. On Monday, Derek was asked to review a critical study on experimental cancer treatments. The company's breakthrough therapy had been stalled for months over inconsistencies in the data. Derek spent the weekend going through every page, every calculation, every molecular structure. What he found made his blood run cold. The research data had been falsified, not subtly. Once Derek knew what to look for, the fabrication was obvious. Test results that couldn't occur naturally, patient responses that defied basic chemistry, molecular interactions that violated fundamental laws of science. Someone had deliberately corrupted the research to make the treatment appear less effective than it actually was. Derek's hands shook as he reached for his phone to call Reed, but then he stopped. If this data had been falsified and if Reed's pharmaceutical breakthrough was being sabotaged from within, then Derek had just stumbled into something much more dangerous than a simple job opportunity. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones that make powerful people angry." Derek looked at the falsified data spread across his desk, then at the photo of his parents in his drawer. 4 years of wondering who had killed his father. 4 years of living on the streets while his father's murderers profited from stolen research. And now Derek was sitting in the middle of what looked like the same conspiracy that had destroyed his family. The question was, what was he going to do about it? That's when Derek's computer chimed with an encrypted message from an address he didn't recognize. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like your father." The threat was unsigned, but the implication was crystal clear. Someone knew exactly who Derek was. Someone had been watching him, and someone was willing to kill to keep their secrets buried. Derek stared at the message, his heart pounding. He could delete it, pretend he'd never seen the falsified data, keep his head down, and enjoy his new life. Or he could do what his father would have done. He forwarded the threat to Reed with a single line, "We need to talk now." Because Derek Matthews wasn't just a research assistant anymore. He was a threat to people who'd already committed murder once. And they were about to discover that Dr. Robert Matthews had taught his son more than just chemistry. He'd taught him that some fights were worth the risk. The emergency meeting took place in Reed's private conference room at 11 p.m. Blinds drawn, phones confiscated. Present were Reed Derrick and Alexandra Chen, Reed's head of security and former FBI cybercrime specialist. The atmosphere was electric with tension as Derek laid out the evidence he'd discovered. "The clinical trial data has been systematically altered," Derek explained, spreading printouts across the mahogany table. "Look at these molecular interaction charts. The binding coefficients are impossible. They violate basic thermodynamics." Reed studied the papers, his face growing paler with each page. "How long has this been going on?" "Based on the pattern analysis, at least 4 years. Someone's been sabotaging our most promising research from the inside." Alexandra looked up from her laptop. "Derek, that threatening message was sent through 7 different proxy servers, but I traced the origin point." She turned the screen toward them. "It came from inside this building." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Reed's own company had been infiltrated at the highest levels. "There's more," Derek said quietly. He pulled out his father's notebook, opening to a page filled with his father's handwriting. "These are my father's original research notes on revolutionary cancer treatment protocols. The same protocols that your company has been developing for the past 5 years. Reed's hands trembled as he examined the notebook. The molecular structures, the treatment methodology, even the specific compound combinations. It was all identical to Reed Pharmaceutical's most classified research. "Your father, Dr. Robert Matthews." Reed's voice trailed off as the pieces finally clicked into place. "He was my research partner, my closest friend. The man who called me at midnight with concerns about falsified data in our trials." Derek's eyes widened. "You knew my father." "I knew him. I worked with him, and I failed to protect him." Reed's voice cracked. "Robert died in that explosion 3 days before he was scheduled to meet with FDA investigators about the data manipulation." The room fell silent as the magnitude of the conspiracy became clear. "Your father discovered what we're discovering now," Reed continued. "Someone was stealing his research, falsifying results to hide the true effectiveness of his breakthrough treatment. When he threatened to expose them, they killed him." Derek finished, his voice hard as steel. Alexandra's fingers flew across her keyboard. "I'm cross-referencing internal communications from 4 years ago, looking for anyone who had access to both the research data and building security systems." Minutes passed in tense silence. Then Alexandra's screen lit up with results that made everyone's blood run cold. "Dr. Patricia Webb," she announced. "Head of oncology research. She had administrative access to all research databases, security clearance for after-hours lab work, and..." Alexandra's voice darkened. "Financial records show payments totaling $2.3 million from shell companies linked to Blackwood Industries over the past 4 years. Reed slammed his fist on the table. "Patricia, she's been here for 8 years. I trusted her completely." "It gets worse," Alexandra continued. "Those shell companies trace back to Richard Blackwood, the same man who tried to have you killed last week. This isn't just corporate espionage. It's a systematic plan to destroy your company and steal your father's research." Derek stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the city lights. So Blackwood killed my father to steal his research, then spent 4 years sabotaging your company from the inside while slowly transferring the intellectual property to his own firms. And when Reed got too close to completing the treatment, Alexandra added, Blackwood decided to eliminate him too, making it look like a random poisoning. Reed looked at Derek with a mixture of admiration and guilt. You saved my life twice, son. Once in that restaurant and again by uncovering this conspiracy. But Derek's expression was grim. It's not over. If Webb knows I've been analyzing the data, if she sent that threat, then she knows I'm Robert Matthews' son. Blackwood will realize I'm a witness to my father's original research. Research that could prove his theft and expose his entire criminal enterprise. As if summoned by his words, Alexandra's phone buzzed with an urgent alert. Building security just detected unauthorized access to the research servers. Someone's trying to delete files remotely. Reed grabbed his phone. Security, this is Reed. Lock down the building immediately. No one enters or exits without my direct authorization. But even as he spoke, they all knew they were probably too late. Webb would have anticipated this moment, prepared contingencies. The question was, how far would she go to protect Blackwood's conspiracy? The answer came in the form of a fire alarm that suddenly shrieked through the building. Red emergency lights began flashing as an automated voice announced, Chemical leak detected in research level. Building evacuation mandatory. Proceed to nearest exit immediately. Through the conference room windows, they could see emergency vehicles already racing toward the building. Too quickly, too organized, as if they'd been staged nearby. It's a setup, Derek said grimly. They're clearing the building so they can eliminate the evidence. And us. Alexandra was already moving, pulling weapons from a concealed safe in Reed's office. There's an emergency exit through the parking garage. If we move now, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. And in that crimson darkness, they heard the elevator ding as someone arrived on their floor. Footsteps in the hallway. Multiple people moving with military precision. Reed grabbed Derek's shoulder. Whatever happens, that notebook can never fall into their hands. Your father's researched the proof of what really happened. It's the only thing that can bring these bastards to justice. Derek clutched the notebook to his chest. Then we make sure it doesn't. The footsteps were getting closer. Alexandra took position by the door gun drawn. Reed moved to his desk, fingers flying across his computer keyboard in one final desperate gambit. What are you doing? Derek whispered. Uploading everything to the cloud. Every file, every piece of evidence, your father's research, all of it. If we don't make it out of here, at least the truth will survive. The door handle rattled. Someone was trying to get in. Derek looked at the man who'd saved him from the streets, who'd given him a chance when no one else would, who'd turned out to be his father's closest friend and greatest ally. Mr. Reed, Derek said quietly. My father would have been proud to call you his partner. Reed smiled grimly as the upload progress bar reached 100%. Call me Marcus' son, and your father was the best man I ever knew. Just like his son. The door exploded inward and everything changed forever. But what happened next would prove that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. It's the truth in the hands of someone brave enough to use it. 3 figures in tactical gear burst through the splintered door, weapons raised. But instead of anonymous mercenaries, Derek found himself staring at familiar faces. Dr. Patricia Webb led the group, her usual lab coat replaced by black tactical gear. Behind her were 2 men Derek recognized as Blackwood Industries security personnel from photos in his father's old files. To step away from the computer, Marcus and Webb said, her voice cold and professional. And you, Derek, hand over that notebook. Reed moved protectively in front of Derek. Patricia, you don't have to do this. We can work something out. Webb laughed bitterly. Work something out? Like you worked something out with Robert Matthews. Your naive idealism killed him, Marcus. He could have taken the money, kept quiet, and been alive today. My father was murdered because he chose integrity over profit. Derek said, his voice steady despite the guns pointed at him. Your father was murdered because he was an obstacle to progress, Webb replied. Do you have any idea how much money his revolutionary treatment will generate hundreds of billions over the next decade? Richard Blackwood saw the potential that you and Marcus were too stupid to capitalize on. Alexandra, who'd been silent in the shadows, suddenly spoke up. Except there's one problem with your plan, Patricia. Webb spun toward the voice, but Alexandra was no longer where she'd been standing. You're under arrest for the murder of Dr. Robert Matthews' conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted murder of Marcus Reed. Alexandra's FBI badge gleamed in the emergency lighting as federal agents flooded through the door behind Webb's team. The tables had turned completely. Webb's security personnel found themselves surrounded, weapons lowered, hands raised in surrender. Hi, how? Webb's face had gone white with shock. Did you really think Derek stumbled onto this conspiracy by accident? Alexandra smiled coldly. The FBI has been investigating pharmaceutical fraud for 2 years. We've been watching Blackwood Industries, tracking the money building our case. When Derek saved Marcus's life and got hired here, we realized we had our inside source. Derek's head was spinning. Your FBI? Special Agent Alexandra Chen, White Collar Crime Division. And Derek, everything you discovered this week we already knew. We've been waiting for Webb to make her move so we could catch her in the act. Reed looked stunned. You've been undercover this entire time. Reed Pharmaceuticals was never the target, Alexandra explained. You were victims, but we needed someone inside who could access the research data and help us prove the connection between your father's murder and Blackwood's conspiracy. Webb's composure finally cracked. You can't prove anything. Robert's death was ruled an accidental explosion. There's no evidence. Actually, there is. Derek pulled out his phone showing a video recording. You just confessed to murdering my father on camera, with federal witnesses present. The color drained from Webb's face as she realized her own words had sealed her fate. Patricia Webb, you're under arrest, Alexandra announced, reading her rights as additional agents secured the scene. But the night's revelations weren't over yet. As Webb was led away in handcuffs, Derek turned to Reed with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. So this whole week, the job offer, the research position, was completely real, Reed said firmly. Yes, the FBI needed someone inside to help build their case, but Derek, I offered you that job because you deserved it. Because you're brilliant. Because you're your father's son. And because, Alexandra added, we knew that if anyone could expose this conspiracy, it would be the son of the man who died trying to stop it. Derek clutched his father's notebook, feeling the weight of 4 years of grief and anger finally beginning to lift. What happens now? Now, Alexandra said, we finish what your father started. 18 months later, the transformation was beyond anything any of them had imagined. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan was packed with reporters as Derek Matthews, now 19 years old and a sophomore at MIT, stepped up to the microphone outside. He wore a simple navy suit, not because he had to, but because he wanted to honor the gravity of the moment. Today's verdict brings justice not just for my father, but for every researcher who's ever died protecting the integrity of science. Derek said, his voice carrying the quiet strength that had first caught Marcus Reed's attention in a Manhattan restaurant. The headlines were already writing themselves. Pharmaceutical conspiracy exposed, 50 billion fraud scheme ends with life sentences. Patricia Webb had received 25 years to life. Richard Blackwood got 40 years for murder, conspiracy, and fraud. 17 other executives across multiple companies faced federal charges. But the real story was happening in laboratories around the world. The Matthews-Reed treatment, as it became known, had revolutionized cancer therapy. Phase 4 trials showed a 94% response rate across all major cancer types. The treatment that Derek's father had died protecting was now saving lives in hospitals across 6 continents. We're looking at the most significant medical breakthrough since penicillin, announced Dr. Sarah Chen at the World Health Organization's annual conference. The Matthews-Reed protocol has fundamentally changed how we approach cancer treatment. The most remarkable aspect wasn't just the medical success, it was the business model. Reed and Derek had established the Matthews Foundation, ensuring the treatment was manufactured at cost and distributed based on need, not ability to pay. Pharmaceutical companies that had built empires on artificial scarcity suddenly found themselves competing with a therapy designed to heal rather than profit. No patient will ever be denied this treatment because of money, Derek had announced at the foundation's launch. That's what my father would have wanted. The media coverage sparked global conversations about pharmaceutical ethics, corporate responsibility in medical research, and the power of inherited knowledge. Medical schools across the country added Robert Matthews' story to their curricula, teaching students that the greatest discoveries came from seeking truth, not profit. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation was personal. Derek's mother, Dr. Jennifer Matthews, had returned to active research after recovering from 4 years of severe depression. The anonymous payments that had covered her treatment turned out to have come from Reed's charitable foundation. Money he'd been sending without knowing Derek was homeless, believing the family was being cared for by relatives. "I thought I'd lost everything when Robert died," Jennifer said at a memorial service held at Columbia University. "But our son carried his father's work forward when I couldn't." Derek didn't just honor his father's memory, he completed his mission. The scholarship program Derek and Reed created exceeded all expectations. The Robert Matthews Memorial Scholarship specifically targeted homeless youth with scientific aptitude, providing not just education funding but comprehensive support, housing, healthcare, mentoring, and most importantly, the message that circumstances don't define potential. We've identified 73 homeless teenagers with exceptional scientific knowledge, reported Professor Williams, who'd once complimented Derek's water analysis at Columbia. "These kids have been surviving on the streets while mastering complex chemistry, physics, and biology. Imagine what they could accomplish with proper resources." One recipient, 17-year-old Marcus Johnson, had been living in subway tunnels while building functional electronics from discarded components. Another 16-year-old, Sophia Rivera, had developed her own water purification system using materials scavenged from construction sites. The mobile chemistry labs Derek designed brought scientific education directly to underserved communities. Bright yellow vans equipped with portable equipment visited homeless encampments, low-income neighborhoods, and rural areas where traditional educational resources were scarce. "E-science isn't something that happens in ivory towers," Derek explained to a group of elementary students in the Bronx. "Science is about asking questions and finding answers. Everyone can be a scientist." Corporate whistleblower protections were strengthened in direct response to Robert Matthews' murder. The Matthews Act provided federal protection and financial support for researchers who exposed fraudulent data or unsafe practices in pharmaceutical development. No scientist should have to choose between their conscience and their life, Derek testified before Congress. "My father died because he tried to do the right thing. We're going to make sure that never happens again." Most powerfully, Derek's story inspired countless acts of everyday heroism. Social media filled with videos of people using their knowledge and skills to help strangers in their communities. The Matthews Challenge became a global movement encouraging individuals to apply their expertise in service of others, no matter how small their contribution might seem. The documentary The Notebook: A Father's Legacy won an Academy Award and sparked international conversations about intellectual property rights, pharmaceutical ethics, and the power of inherited knowledge. But the most important moment wasn't captured by any camera. 3 years after that night in the restaurant, Derek stood in the newly opened Robert Matthews Memorial Laboratory at MIT. The space was everything his father would have wanted: cutting-edge equipment, collaborative workspaces, and a mission statement engraved in brass by the entrance. "Knowledge is power, but wisdom is knowing when to act." Marcus Reed found him there on a Thursday evening, working late on his doctoral thesis. a study on ethical pharmaceutical development that would become required reading in business schools worldwide. Still saving the world, I see, Reed said, settling into a chair by Derek's workstation. Derek looked up from his laptop, now 22 years old, but with the same determined eyes that had stopped a murder 4 years earlier. Just following the example I was given, Reed gestured to a framed photograph on Derek's desk. The same picture of his parents from years ago, now accompanied by newer photos. Derek receiving his first research award, the family reunited at his MIT graduation, and a candid shot of Derek teaching chemistry to homeless teenagers in Central Park. "Your father would be proud," Reed said quietly. "I think he'd be proud of what comes next," Derek replied, pointing to a stack of scholarship applications on his desk. 87 new students this year, kids who've been overlooked, underestimated, forgotten by the system. Each one carries knowledge that could change everything. Reed nodded, remembering another overlooked teenager who'd changed his life forever. "Any homeless chemistry prodigies in the bunch?" 5, actually, including a 16-year-old who's been developing revolutionary battery technology while living in abandoned warehouses. Derek's eyes lit up with the same passion his father had shown. Imagine what she could do with proper resources. As evening fell over Cambridge, both men understood that the work would never be finished. There would always be another person in need, another life to save, another opportunity to choose courage over comfort. But that's exactly how it should be, because sometimes the most ordinary moment, a homeless teenager noticing something wrong, can spark extraordinary change. And somewhere in the city, another young scientist was probably developing the knowledge that would save tomorrow's world. Derek closed his laptop and walked to the window overlooking the campus where his father had once studied, where Derek had earned his degrees, where the next generation of ethical scientists was being trained. "You know," Derek said, "I never thanked you properly for that night." Reed joined him at the window. "For what?" "For listening when a homeless kid said the word poison. For seeing past my circumstances to who I really was. For giving me the chance to finish what my father started." Reed smiled. "Derek, you saved my life that night. But more than that, you reminded me why I became a scientist in the first place. To help people, to seek truth, to make the world better. My father always said that knowledge without action is just entertainment," Derek reflected. "But knowledge with courage, that can change everything." They stood in comfortable silence, two men bound by tragedy, but united by purpose, watching as students crossed the campus below. Young minds full of potential, carrying within them the seeds of discoveries that might one day save millions of lives. "The next breakthrough could come from anywhere," Derek said. "From someone society has written off, someone living on the streets, someone everyone else overlooked." Reed nodded. "Then we'd better keep watching, keep listening, keep believing that brilliance doesn't need permission to change the world." And in laboratories and libraries across the globe, in homeless shelters and community centers, in quiet moments when one person chose to help another, the ripple effects continued spreading. Because Derek Matthews' story wasn't really about a homeless teenager who saved a billionaire's life. It was about what happens when knowledge meets courage at exactly the right moment, when someone chooses to act instead of looking away. When society finally recognizes that genius can emerge from the most unexpected places. The real power of Derek's story wasn't in the dramatic rescue or the conspiracy exposed or the fortune earned. It was in the simple truth that everyone, absolutely everyone, deserves to be seen, heard, and believed when they step forward with knowledge that could help. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the most important message. Sometimes the person society ignores holds the key to everyone's future. And sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage to change the world forever. Derek Matthews learned that truth the night he saved Marcus Reed's life. But more importantly, he spent the rest of his life proving it to others. Because in the end, that's what heroes really do. They don't just save lives, they show the rest of us how to save each other.